Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Grover's Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, April 10th, 2025, and today we're talking creative ways of dealing with limited compost options, how to choose which fruits to grow, and can weed whacking a cover crop and then tarping it kill the cover crop more quickly? The answer may surprise you, or maybe not. We'll find out, so let's do it. All right, well, happy Thursday, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. It's been chilly here this week, and it rained quite a bit more this morning, which is not great. Otherwise, it's looking like a mild spring weather for the next week or so I'm looking forward to that. I am expecting dogwood winter to rear its head here shortly in the next 10 days, but at this moment, it looks okay. Got some strawberries planted yesterday, specifically Early Glow, a great tasting but very slow to production strawberry that is spring planted and really doesn't get going until year 2. You can plant some in the fall, and I plan to plant some suckers in the fall, but generally you have to wait a full year on them before they start producing, and then they produce for like 3 years, which is great because I don't have plans for that tunnel where I put them, having cut our production back this season. So the plan is to hold that space down with some strawberries deliciously. And I have some onions interplanted in there not for the bulbs though, but specifically for onion seed. I'm always kind of tinkering with seed stuff and figured since alliums and strawberries do so well together that this would be kind of a fun experiment. We'll see how that goes. I'm not relying on it, but if I can get some, onion seed, that would be fun. Anyway, more on all that another time, because today, as has become the tradition on Thursdays, we're going to take a few questions from our Patreon members to make sure we stay vaguely up to date over there. As you will recall, this past month, I accidentally skipped a bunch of February questions, so really doing some catching up this week. Anyway, our first Patreon question of the day comes from Patreon member Bill Price, who writes, quote, "I was listening to the show today," which would have been 2/18. Sorry, Bill. "And the topic of leaves and contamination reminded me of a topic I was hoping you could address. Leaves are about all I have here, aspen and ash mainly, but I'm limited on ways to efficiently decompose them. Good compost is hard to source. 2 years ago, I accidentally hammered my beds with compost contaminated with clopyralid herbicides. It was from a local nursery that tried to source clean materials, and it was supposed to be clean, but it was obviously not. I still see the effects of it. The grass, hay, and cereal straw here is likely all contaminated, and I'm afraid to use neighbors' animal manures as they don't control for contamination, and these herbicides don't break down in animal guts or hot composting. Sorry, a bit of a frustrating rant, but is this a big problem for market gardeners too? How does one deal with limited compost options?" End quote. Okay, great, Bill, and thanks for the question and support, and of course, bummer about the contamination. That's really unfortunate. In short, yes, market gardeners deal with bad compost and poor compost access all the time. It's a huge challenge. So in terms of limited compost, I've talked about this relatively recently when I talked about farming options, when deep composting is not really one of those options. I did that last week, but let's look at this from somewhat of a different angle. What if you really need or want compost? What are some creative ways to make that happen? Like, for instance, Bill references leaves here as a carbon source. Leaves can be absolutely wonderful, but they can be frustrating in how long it takes for them to decompose. On a strictly experimental aside here, I have a little experiment running where I've filled a large hole that I was digging out for a pond, and I'm still digging out for a pond, with leaves to see if it could get them to decompose more rapidly in just kind of like a wet space like that for, over the winter and then into the spring. And then I would just go back in the middle of the summer and harvest whatever of the leaf mold is left when the pile sort of dries after it's broken down. But that is me just kind of goofing around, trying to find some passive composting options that don't require much work. On a more serious, perhaps proven note, mixing those leaves with a nitrogen source is the first, most obvious option. It doesn't have to be your neighbor's manure, though, i.e. you could find some organic blood meal or fish scraps or whatever you have locally that isn't sprayed, mix it in with the leaves and let that compost and then cure just like a normal compost pile would. With leaves, I generally say to expect like 6 months before that compost is really nice and thoroughly usable, though another couple months of at least curing wouldn't hurt either. Another option that doesn't require turning is in-bed composting, like lasagna gardening, for instance, where manure or whatever the nitrogen source is stacked between layers of carbon, like straw, or in your case, perhaps leaves, and left to decompose. Kept moist, often under a tarp, and it's just left that way for several months. An example of this is Ben Hartman of Clay Bottom Farm and the Lean Farmer. Says he takes like a bed every year, maybe multiple beds a year, and dumps garden scraps like greens after they have flipped a bed onto the top of the bed, then covers it with a small tarp, well pinned down just for the wind. And they leave that for several weeks to sort of decompose the material right there on top of the bed surface. So for those with limited composting options, that could be a good way to replenish old beds. Succulent greens will break down faster than, say, grass clippings, and not to mention contain fewer weed seeds. But early season grass clippings also can be, before the weed seed has potentially set in, could also be a really good option for nitrogen. That green grass is full of nitrogen. Once the clovers and dandelions and grasses have set their seed, though, grass clippings are compost only fodder. Like they have to be hot composted to get rid of the weed seed risks. There really is no one easy answer to this, but as I always say, look around and see what organic resources are being wasted in your area. Maybe it's spent brewery grains that can be worked into compost piles, or spoiled hay that can be composted, or leaves, or maybe even seaweed for some of you. One person's trash can be another person's soil amendment, as the saying goes. In fact, and I should say, depending on your timeline, that neighbor's manure may be okay if you're willing to allow for a good hot composting period and then a long curing process. A lot of the issues with persistent herbicides making it through commercial compost, as I understand it, is that those composters are just making the compost too quickly and not allowing enough time for the herbicides to break down. So a lot of them do have really long half-lives, like after they've, just the period of time where they're effective at being an herbicide. With the hot composting, with the biological activity, they will eventually break down. It just takes a little time and some hot composting. So if you started making next year's compost today and really did it right, that can greatly reduce that risk of herbicide contamination. And then you can, just to be safe, you can test it with a bioassay just to, just for insurance. So anyway, what creative ways have you all found to get around a lack of good compost in your area? It's something we are always battling here, and I'm always looking for different ideas and different wasted materials to be able to utilize. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to decide which fruit trees to even bother with. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. Newsletters, right? A necessary evil for CSA farmers. Join Farmhand and real CSA farmers on April 11th for a free digital workshop where they'll share strategies they use to turn their newsletters into powerful sales tools. Get the secrets and go-to templates for success when you register for the free workshop today at farmhand.partners/newsletter. That's farmhand.partners/newsletter. And I'll put the link in the show notes. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's second Patreon question comes from Patreon member Emery Brandon, who asks, quote, question 1, what fruit trees do you recommend growing, and any insight there? Question 2, I'm a graphic designer wanting to do more freelance work for farmers. Do you think cold emailing specific farms is the best way to get my services in front of someone? End quote. Okay, so great couple of questions there. Let's start with question 1 about fruit trees. Annuals are nice because, for the most part, with a little finagling, you can grow most annual vegetable crops in most regions with a handful of exceptions, or possibly some different infrastructure here or there. Perennials are a harder ask in that way. By and large, your region is going to determine which perennials you are going to be able to grow, and that is especially true with trees that can't be easily fit inside of a greenhouse necessarily. So the first question I would ask you is where you live. What is your growing region and hardiness zone? Like, I would love to grow citrus here in Kentucky, zone 6B, as I've talked about probably way too much at this point, but there's not much in the way of citrus that can withstand our cold, not citrus that I love, and certainly not after the January that we had. So what I would do is look around and ask around, possibly with nearby nurseries, and see what can be reliably grown in your region. You may find that you can only really grow a couple different tree fruits in your region, which will help narrow it down a lot. Or you may live in California where you can grow basically 100 different types of fruit, and in which case, just pick whatever one you like most. Also, think about what you may want to do with it or want it for. If it's something you want to sell, something you want to store for winter, something you want to turn into something else like jams or ciders, all of that should play a role in which ones you choose. What does that market look like for the fruit or that product? That's all important as well. What about harvesting, processing, ground preparation? What are the details? Like some sites may not be good for some fruits. So how your ground lays, whether it's north facing, south facing, all those things could play a factor. For me, I would go through and make a general enterprise budget, yes, even for a backyard scale, and figure out how much it is going to cost to properly manage X number of trees. In an enterprise budget, basically just outlines all the costs. So what will you need to buy? How much will the fruit trees cost? How much will the storage and harvest equipment cost, etc.? Figure out roughly what the startup cost is and what the year-to-year cost will be for management. It may be a scary number for, say, 10 trees, but also you may have 5 years or more before you really have to build the storage or buy the harvest bins, because trees are mockingly slow into production. So the cost can be spread out over time. Also, since you asked for further insights, buy stuff that makes sense for your other goals. Like if you want to plant them around a garden, don't, for instance, maybe buy like cherries or some other trees that may sneak their roots in there more readily. Plan out where you are going to plant them based on how they may or may not add shade to the garden or interact with it. Like I mentioned, do a little market research and figure out what is in abundance locally and what is not. That will tell you what's worth, especially if you plan on selling it. That'll tell you what's worth growing and what's maybe not worth growing. Or if you don't plan to sell much or any of it, what do you like? You may be interested in making some hard cider or something. You can technically do that with like apples and pears and for Perry, for instance, but the types that are good for eating are not the ideal varieties for making ciders and Perrys. So like if your goal is to make something like that, you probably want to get the pears that are better for that sort of thing, that have, higher acidity or whatever is required. Plus, if you don't like pears, and you don't plan to sell them, don't grow them. Even if that's what makes sense for you and your region. It may end up being more trouble than it's worth, and also you may end up wasting a lot of pears. Instead, invest in some perennial natives and let those things go to town, beautifying the area and feeding beneficials. Now, for question 2 about doing freelance graphic design for farmers, that could honestly be pretty helpful for some growers, especially those just wanting to, just starting out or wanting to rebrand. I don't think it hurts to send someone an email or message with some samples and just say, hey, I'm a graphic designer. If you or anyone you know might need some design, here's my info. Generally, farmers just use the people they know, or they ask other farmers who they used. As you probably know, getting a good brand and logo is important, but more often than not, farmers are just kind of going to the nearest possible option. So yeah, just be that nearest possible option, and that will help. Go hand out some business cards at market while supporting those farmers and not getting in between them and sales, of course. Running any small business is a grind, but once you get in the door at a few farms, other farmers might call because, well, we usually just ask our friends where they got their branding done. So anyway, I hope some of that was helpful. We will take one last question with a little read from our friends at Rimmel Greenhouses. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, or in our case today, strawberries, a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing.
Stay away from my door.
All right, so our third and final Patreon question of the day comes to us from Chris Pace, who asks, quote, "Hey, Farmer Jesse, what's going on? How are things and the family? My question to you is about using the tarps. Could I run a trimmer/weed whacker to my cover crop and then cover? Would that speed it up a bit and avoid tilling? Will it cause pathogens?" End quote. All right, well, first off, thanks, Chris, and the family is awesome. Thank you for asking. Kids in general are the coolest things ever to me, especially as they get older and their personalities start to really develop. Endlessly fascinating. But, okay, to your actual question, we are going to dive deeper into cover crop termination in May because that is when most of it goes down, literally and figuratively, I suppose. But basically, you're asking, if you cut the cover crop down with a weed whacker and then cover it with a black tarp, will it speed up the termination? The answer is not necessarily. let's assume the cover crop that you're talking about is, say, cereal rye. If you cut it early in the spring before it has started to go to flower, you have basically just encouraged it to regrow and created a sod. And depending on where you are, tarping it early won't kill the sod, right? Or at least not right away. Like right now, here in April, things are not really dying under a tarp yet. That's just not the way it works. It's not warm enough, really. Stuff is still relatively dormant and can live off their energy in their roots for quite a while. Once it warms up, plants exhaust that energy much more rapidly, and that's when they begin to die. Now, however, if you waited until the plant was in milk stage, which is the stage when a liquid can be pressed out of the seed heads before they turn hard, like you'll feel them start to fill up with something, and then you can squeeze it and a liquid pops out, that's milk stage. Anyway, if you wait till that stage, then it's possible to kill it this way. But part of it is also that it will be warm enough by then. And crimping honestly can do a better job because it just cuts the roots off from the rest of the plant. So mowing it actually may encourage, or weed whacking may actually encourage it to keep growing. For us, that happens around mid-May. If you go at it really, really low to the ground with a weed whacker, that could help kill it earlier, but the tarping would still take quite a while to finish them off without any sort of tillage. You would still get some good regrowth even if you went really low to the soil surface, like I said, because that's kind of the value of crimping. There is no quick and easy way to kill cover crops early. They really require proper planning and a good termination strategy. As for pathogens, that doesn't worry me so much. I don't see any reason they would cause pathogens unless the cover crop shares a pathogen with the cash crop, which more often than not is not the case because we're not growing, that's part of why we plant different crop species as cover crops than we plant as cash crops. They don't share diseases as much. So there's a bonus there. Termination and all that good stuff is something we will definitely cover more in depth in the near future. So stay tuned. Otherwise, let's call it a Thursday. Don't forget, we are now officially a 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you are getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you ever want to sponsor an episode, you can hit up Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com and she will help you out. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No Till Growers. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Let that one breathe for a second. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of April, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to David Ganaway. Yep. Lou Bellman, that's a good novelistic name. And Jenny Beasley. These are all very fun names today. And they are joining our crew on our energy potato farm, mandated by a judge. And basically the potatoes at this point have completed their life cycle and it's time to harvest them. This, to be sure, between the pests and the animals, but also because of the glowing potatoes that could alert planes, and because handling the actual energy potatoes is dangerous. This is actually the hardest part of all those hard things they've done. So harvest begins with our crew of judge-ordered workers putting on their protective suits and getting out there at the peak of the day, in the heat of the summer, to harvest. And it goes well, but they all are very whooped at the end. But on their way back to their cabins, Jenny spots a spud that must have just fallen out of the wagon. And Jenny turns to her crew, Lou and David, and asks, and just says, point blank, like, we kind of have to eat this, right? So the crew nods in agreement, and what happens when they bake it and eat it? We'll find out tomorrow. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you for the stunning conclusion of Energy Potato Farm, Part 2. We're working on the name. Bye.